Could you please type a 1 if you can hear me but can't see the slide? But if you can hear and see the slide, can I see you type a 1 and a 2? 1 and a 2 in the chat box. A 1 and a 2 in the chat box. Let me see. Okay. All right. Great, great, beautiful. Yeah, good afternoon once more. We're taking BUS 261 Management and Business Environment. And I know some of my colleagues have been taking you to in the past. So today we're going to be looking at organizations and the relevant business environment. Organizations and the relevant business environment. Okay. Now, when we talk about organizations and the relevant business environment, what are we looking at? Well, we'll want to look at the definition of organization, the types of organizations that we have. We define business environment, state the types of environment, identify environments as sources of input and repository for organizational output, and also how to manage the interface between organizations and their relevant environment. In essence, that is the learning objectives of the lecture, of today's lecture that I have just listed out for us. So we'll need to start first of all by defining organization. What would be an organization? Well, an organization, as we do know, is an entity or a body, say companies, institutions, associations that comprises more than one, person. And these people come together for a particular purpose. You also agree that an organization is a set of people who work together for a given objectives. Like you have the unions, like the alumni associations, even your class, you are a group, you are an organization, because you have a purpose for stating or starting the, what do you call it, the WhatsApp group or Telegram group or whatever it is you have. So they are generally systems created to achieve common goals via people to people, as well as people to work relationships, okay? We have an organization, we have a mission, we have an objective. How do we relate in the workplace? How do we work together? You and I, and then even with, achieving the objectives. And of course, we know that organization is not a word, it is a Greek word that is called organon. Organon, yes. An organon, as we know, is a tool for instrument, just like you have the organ that you use to play a musical instrument, so to say. So it is a social system that will comprise all forms of human relationships, but at work and with the intent of making, carrying out an objective. Now we have types of organizations. What are the types of organizations that we have? We said basically we have two broad organizations. I want to classify them as public organizations, like you have the government establishments, you have their agencies, you have corporations and what have you. And there are also the private organizations, like the non-governmental organizations, the for-profit organizations. When I mean for-profit organizations, that's those who go out, to make profit, like the business organizations we're talking about, political associations, charities, cooperatives, not-for-profit too, educational institutions, and what have you. Sometimes, people may engage in illegal operations or illicit or secret organizations that are criminally minded, and want to work against the laid down rules. Those are not organizations, but we have them because the secret societies, exist, and they also have You have to be recognized by government. That is what makes you truly an organization. Excuse me. Now, still talking about organizations, I think our interest here really, since we're talking about business, will be for profit business organization. But anyhow, whether within the public or the private, we still have organizations, that make money. When we talk about government corporations, those that have been commercialized and privatized and all of that, they are business organizations. But looking, essentially or especially at the private organizations, we have the sole proprietorships, have partnerships, we have limited liability companies, and then we also have the corporations. We'll take them briefly because I'm going to refer you to ABUS 221. The module is on the LMS, and I'm sure some of you have the soft copies. If you go down, you will be able to read through all these forms of business organizations in detail, the advantages, their disadvantages, and what have you. We'll just run through them because we're talking about types and forms of business organization. Now, sole proprietorship, as we do know, can also be called a sole trader or can be called an individual entrepreneurship, But the thing is, they are unincorporated, meaning they are not a corporate entity. They operate on their own and is usually owned by one individual. In fact, it is the simplest legal form of a business entity. And they enjoy their profit alone, enjoy their losses too, or liabilities also alone. Then when we talk about partnerships, we're talking about, organizations of two or more people that call themselves partners. They may come in an equal basis. They may also not come in an equal basis depending on, what one's interest is. Some may just want to invest. Others may want to, be engaged in the business of running the business and also benefiting from the profits and what have you. So their responsibilities, their liabilities, their profits, is owned by them and they can share. Somebody's audio is on. Could you please turn off your audio? When I am done, you turn it on and then we can discuss. You ask questions, please. Now, we have different types of partnerships. You have the general partnerships, you have limited partnerships, limited liability partnerships, and all the rest, okay? But the next one there are the limited liability companies. These ones are one of the most flexible types of businesses, that we have. It combines an aspect of partnership and corporation. Though we are not in corporation yet, but it takes in, some aspect of partnership and some aspect of a corporation. Now, they enjoy some tax benefits too. Like, in the sole proprietorship, it's only the owner of the business that is taxed. The business may not be taxed, but the owner will pay, they pay as you earn kind of tax and what have you. So in some limited liability companies, some owners of those businesses may enjoy that type of, benefits that the sole proprietors enjoy, and even the partners too enjoy, depending. But one thing is, once it's limited liability companies, the organization will be taxed, and then the individuals too can also have theirs taxed. But the income too that comes is also theirs, and they can share depending on, what is agreed upon. Then we also have the corporations. These ones right from the beginning ab initio are separate legal entities that the shareholders created. These ones are even more complicated to create because you need to go through a lot of process. You have your articles of incorporation, memorandum of association, and all the rest, which will be drafted and taken to CAC, to be registered, and you may need to tell them the number of shares that you're ready to issue, the names of the owners and location of the business, and the purpose of the business. So you will need to declare all of that when it comes, unlike the sole proprietorship or partnership, that you may not be, asked to do that. So corporations are really separate from their owners. If anything happens to the organization pays. It does not go down to the owners of that organization. It is just the organization to whatever, you know, their ability and how they are liable to determine, you know, how the company settles its debts, or even if there are legal disputes, you know. So that is the difference in corporations. They are just separate from their organization. They are there as entities on their own, while the organization is also an entity on its own. So if anybody must sue, it is the organization they will sue and not the individuals who own the organization. All right. Now, continuing with the forms or the types, as it were, no matter, you know, the type or form of an organization, what usually matters is how you run the organization. What structure are you going to put in place? How will people relate with one another in order to ensure that they realize the business objectives? So you need that organizational structure, which is simply an idea that depends on the activity and the authority relationship in the company. And it must be designed in such a way to realize business objectives. And so we said there are two types of structures. You have the formal structures and you have the informal structures. You have the formal structures and you have the informal structures. Now, what are formal organizational structures? This kind of structure arises from the fact that management sits down, you know, to draft the rules and regulations and procedures that will guide an organization, I mean, in relation to work and the relationships among members of the group. For instance, we have several of them, like the line or scalar organization, like they will say, functional organization, line and staff organization, matrix organization, project management, line staff and functional, you know, put together committee organizations. Whereas the informal organizational structure, you know, looks at the relationship between employees over a period of time. You know, when people work together, they'll begin to understand themselves, you know, because of the social nature of humans. It's possible you begin to jive with somebody very well who may not necessarily be your boss, you know, your direct boss, but you find something in that person. Of course, given your prejudices or your biases or what you feel about the person and your interests, essentially. So it usually arises out of personal and social nature of most times formed via, what do you call it? Formed through the formal organizations, okay? Now let's look at some of the formal organizations, formal structure. Like I said, we have the line or scalar organization. Scalar or line in the sense that it's a military form of organizational. The rule or command will have to come from the top and then trickles down to the last person in the organization. It's actually the oldest and simplest pattern of organizational structure, where the supervisor, you know, will have outright supervision power over the subordinate from top to bottom. So there is no you know, moving to the right or to the left or horizontal. Everything is vertical. Oga said to the supervisor or the way it works. And then we also like the names that are done in the organization. If, for instance, like in most of the organizations now, you have the production department, you have the finance, you have the marketing, you have the personnel, and what have you. So tasks and relationships are going to be channeled along that route. So it's not a case of just you know, the boss on top talking to another boss at the, but now all the functional areas have their superiors. So they take what do you call it, instructions from those who are in their areas, and most times these are people who are well knowledgeable in that organization. Then the next there is the line and staff organization. When you talk about line and staff, usually lines are looked at from the production angle, yes. But staff now will have to do with something like the administrative, those who may be experts, but who are not really involved in that, action of production. But they are there to advise the GM or the CEO, of course, and then it trickles to even the line. So you have staff sometimes in form of probably the lawyers, the legal angle of the organization, the admin, depending. So for the primary job, the apply line, and then for the other supportive activities, like supervision or appointing of supervisors who can oversee what is happening and advise, then they apply the staff. That is more or less like horizontal. That is the way it works. Now, you also have another structure which will involve the line, staff, and functional. So it's a combination of the three. Sometimes when the organogram is drawn or the structure is drawn, it looks like it's a bit complicated in nature. So sometimes people just say or call it a complicated type of organization, all right? But what that simply does, or what that simply implies, is that you are merging these whole three. We've talked about line, where it trickles from the topmost to the least person in the organization, and then staff, those who will be by the side, to advise, and then the functional area. So you can see with that, it is a bit relaxed, that others are not just coming from the top alone. There are bridges in between. Now we also have the matrix organization. The matrix organization combines functional and project management organization. Project management organization will look at, if you see the slide there, all right, but those are simply people who have been, brought in or included in the structure because of certain basic projects that they have to, do. And so they are incorporated as project managers. So in that matrix organization, you have simply a combination of the functional, that's the people in the production, finance, and whatever in the functional areas, merging together with the project manager, to form what you can call an organizational structure. And then the reporting line is put in that method. Then we also have the committee organizational structure. This is simply adding a network of committees to the line and staff organization, all right? In most organizations now, that is what people do. You discover that it is not just enough to have the structure the way it is. At some point, you will need to organize committees. They could be ad hoc in nature. They can also be a standing committee, but they have a place in the structure of the organization, all right? Now, the project management, like I have just explained, is a setup within an organization that is simply to accomplish a project firm's objective. Project management, that is what they engage in, but they appear in the organizational structure. Now, let's look at environment, which is, we've talked about organizations, their types, their forms, but like we said, these organizations do not operate in a vacuum. They operate within an environment. And so that takes us to the definition of environment. Like I did tell you earlier when we were starting in the first lecture I had with you people, we said environment is the surroundings, the external objects, internal objects, influences, circumstances under which someone or something exists. And then Casby in 1999 told us that an environment is the setting within which something exists. And most times that setting, shows some characteristics like complexity, dynamism, it's multifaceted and far-reaching impact. Of course, like they tell us, business environment is complex, it is dynamic, it has different faces, multifaceted, and has far-reaching impact on organizations and even the society at large. So now what is business environment? Since we understand what environment is, it is still the same. Business is not different. Business still faces those surroundings, within which they operate, their relationship with the community where they operate, all the institutions, organizations, individuals whose activities have an impact, whether it is direct or indirect on business activity. And this business environment may differ from society to society, even region to region, country to country. You can see now that the business environment, let's even say in the East now, is not the same as the business environment in Lagos, because in Lagos there is stability. In the East, we don't have that stability. People are scared to move out or to go about their businesses. So sometimes it is favorable, like we have it here now, we're enjoying some favorability because there is peace. And sometimes too, it may be hostile. Those there now are facing the hostility that is going on within their environment. Now, what constitute business environment, or how do we see business environment? From knowledge and research, there are basically two types of business environment. You have the internal environment and you have the external environment. What are the internal environment? These internal environments usually attempt controllable environment. Reason, because they are within the domain of the organization to make changes when need arises. Whereas the external environment is seen as uncontrollable, because most of the things that happen in it, an organization may not have the capacity to control them. They will just need to adjust strategically to be able to take advantage of an opportunity or look for a way to minimize the threat that whatever the environment is posing to them. And this environment is further divided into two. We call the macro, and micro environment. Macro environment, like I said, is regarded as the general environment, whereas the micro environment of external environment is the specific or task environment. So different scholars have their classification. Basically, these are the two types of environments that we have. Now, let's look at what the internal environment, like I said, are factors which management has control over, at least in the short run. If nothing in the short run, they have control over such and can make changes where necessary. This environment is made up of physical and social factors within the boundaries of even their decision-making process. Sometimes even the product of the organization or the services they render, can become a problem for them as their internal environment. And when you talk about strengths, you're talking about inherent capacities, those capacities that they have within them that they can use to gain strategic advantage over their competitors. The strong points of the business, sometimes it could be in terms of skills, the core skills that they have, the competencies, their expertise, their capabilities, and all of that. And when you talk about their weaknesses, they are also their inherent limitations or probably some constraints that the organization have that can give them a disadvantage. Sometimes what the organization lacks, if they lack taking decisions early, their competitors are likely to, take possession of what it was, in terms of the kind of skills that they have, or there are faults and what have you, in their machines and what have you. These are all weaknesses for the organization. But what successful managers do is to ensure or to look for ways, to ameliorate their weaknesses or overcome them, and possibly, convert them into strengths rather than buying, moaning and weeping because of the weaknesses. Now let's look at the external environment too. The external environment is a set of, when we say business environment is complex, most times it is from the external environment. So it's a set of complex, rapidly changing and significant interacting forces that affect the organization's ability to serve its customers. Most organizations operate within the larger framework of the external environment, and this shapes their opportunities or pose threats to them. And so the external environment will have a very big impact on marketing decisions taken by organizations. And of course, successful organizations will always want to scan the external environment so that they will know what is happening and respond, appropriately. And that may earn them, profit if there are unmet needs and trends in the markets they are targeting. So external forces, like we said, are not controlled by an organization, but they may be influenced or affected by the organization. All organizations need to do is to understand the environmental, conditions and look for strategies, to interact with those conditions and see how they go about it or come. Now let's look at that division of macro and micro. I did say the macro environment is called the general environment or remote environment because it consists of all the forces that are outside of the institution that have an actual or potential impact on the organization's ability to achieve its objectives. And what are these environments we're talking about? We have the economic environment, like we have it in Nigeria today, everybody is crying. We have the technological environment, we have the political environment, legal, social, cultural, demographic, and then the ecosystem. All of these are environments that a business does not have under its control. Now, let's look at each of them one after the other. Economic environment. When we talk about economic environment, of course, we know that changes in major economic variables definitely will have a significant impact on the organization, business organization, and probably the marketplace. Economic environmental factors will have effect on consumer purchasing power and spending patterns, just like it has on Nigerians now. Everybody is crying. The inflation rate is so high. There is unemployment, interest rates for those who are borrowing, is also so high. The income remains stagnant for those who are working, and even for business people, the margin of what is coming in is nothing to write about. Those are economic environment. So for organizations that are producing certain things, let's say there's a particular weight or a particular number that an organization was producing earlier. With what we have in our economy, using Nigeria as an example, most of those organizations may not be producing up to that. So most organizations are not operating at their optimum capacity. They are not. And so that's the economic environment for us. Go to the market today, what you got for 1 naira, there is no 1 naira. What you got for, say, 50 naira, 100 naira, you go the next time, you're probably going to get it for 500 naira. And so that's it. Then we have the technological environment. Of course, this has to do with the techniques of production or methods of rendering services or what have you. And most times we have, new advancing technologies. Today, one technology is coming out, tomorrow another is coming to take over. And so most businesses, that do not take advantage of those changes in technology may be laid back, maybe just way back behind as others are making it. Okay, if there are new methods of creating or new methods of packaging your good or new methods of producing, you must key in. Like the banks, I wonder if there's any bank that does not have an ATM machine now scattered everywhere. Otherwise, businesses will not go because they know how much that they realize from these ATMs. And so it is in technology. Once there's an alteration, or maybe a new one, it can destroy an industry and probably stimulate an entirely new market or separate market. So technology has a tremendous impact or effect on lifestyles, consumption patterns, and even the economy. And so every organization is affected by that. It is not controlled. Then when we talk about political and legal environment, there is no organization in any nation that will operate on its own without the rules and regulations, guiding that organization. And we have government always, rolling out the regulations and legislations which every organization must follow. For instance, now, some, some products, excuse me, are enjoying subsidies, some tariffs, import quotas, exports and what have you. So all those are regulations that the government will put in place. Even the interest rate we're talking about, sometimes it's like government wants to control and saying, but they end up not controlling because the forces of market, determines that. So the political environment will include, the special interest groups or the pressure groups that we have in us, that influence and limit activities of various organizations and individuals, probably in a given society. But sometimes too, business uses those pressure groups too, like when there's a regulation in the environment and the people or businesses feel this cannot fly or this is not good enough for us. Business can also sponsor, pressure groups that will mount pressure, through advocacy to the government, and government may want to, maybe step aside a little or drop the regulation. So those are the environments, but oftentimes it's business that is worst hit with those environments. You can't change anything, you need to keep in. Now, demographic environment. What are we talking about in demographic environment? Of course, changes in demography can result in significant opportunities or a significant threat to an organization. How is that so? Demography will show you your current and potential customers, where they are, how many they are, and those who are willing to patronize. Demography will study the human population and tell you size, tell you how dense they are, their location, age, sex, occupation, and what have you. And it is this demography that determines what producers do what produce. If, for instance, you're in the business of producing children's wear and all of that, by the time you know the number of children that you have within a nation or within a set area and all of that, you know that it's likely if you produce this, it will sell because you're targeting a particular market, which are children, or you're targeting the male or you're targeting the female. It just depends on what you want and what you are doing. So demography is really very important and can destabilize an organization. If, for instance, in Canada now, where we had, aside from Nigerians have been trooping in there to balance their economy a little, before then, they were a community or a society of aged people. And so anybody who is going to Canada at that time to produce anything for the youth will probably be making a very big mistake. So demography is very important in business, and it's an external environment we cannot change. Now we're still continuing with the macro environment, the sociocultural environment. When we talk about sociocultural environment, you're looking at society's basic values, their preferences, their perceptions, and behavior. If you have changes in the sociocultural environment, it will also affect consumer behavior. And when it affects consumer behavior that they are not buying, that also means that businesses will begin to drop. Okay? If the taste, most women now ordinarily do not go to the salon to say they want to enter the dryer. They will rather, wash their hair, weave it, and use their weave on. So anybody who is still in the business of only not doing washing and setting, retouching of hair, may not be able to get anywhere with that business, except, of course, you fall into, the preferences of the people, which is the sociocultural environment, or even the cultural values of the environment. Like we heard, probably in the north, you're not supposed to sell alcohol, and you go to the north and you're selling alcohol. That means the cultural value has caught up with you there, and you cannot do anything about it because that is the value of the people. Now we look at the ecosystem environment. The ecosystem environment is simply telling us about the natural systems and resources. When we talk about the resources either you dig up from the ground or that nature has bestowed us with, like we have several of them here, that we need as inputs, in our businesses. some of these things, when the ecosystem is bad, it also affects us. It affects our businesses. If, for instance, your raw material will come from the bush, from the trees and what have you, and people are busy setting the forest, on fire and stuff like that, your raw materials may be very difficult to get. Okay, or like we are tapping our oil and that is our mainstay now, we're not looking elsewhere. People keep saying someday that oil will get dried up. We wouldn't know about that, but that is it. And so the ecosystem environment is also a very, very important system environment that we cannot change, okay, depending on what it gives us. But what most nations are doing now is that they have intensified efforts, to avoid shortages of these raw materials. For instance, now we use our oil, and the process or what have you, to generate what do you call it, fuel and all the rest. People are saying we can go green marketing environment, so that we leave the oil alone a little and use other things. Even for generation of light, we can use solar and not necessarily all the gas that we flare and what have you, or the wind energy. So people should use, renewable energies in place of non-renewable energies, like I mentioned, oil, coal, and all the natural, resources that we have, that as we keep using them, they are diminishing in size and quantity. Now let's look at the external environment, micro. The micro environment, or the specific environment, or task environment, or operating environment. The ones we have talked about, the pest or pesty or whatever you want to call it, we've talked about, ordinarily may affect everybody. But when we talk about the external micro environment, we're looking at those environments that is specific to you or to your organization as an entity. And who are those that will be specific to you? First is the market. That is your consumers or your customers or what have you. The next will be your competitors, those who are doing the same business with you, or even your suppliers, those who supply your raw materials, and the marketing intermediaries. Of course, you know what the marketing intermediaries are. Those are the people, who go between you and your business to ensure that your product or your services, gets to everybody that needs to have that service. So you can see them the way I've explained them here. When we talk about market, we are simply looking at your customers, okay? Must closely monitor what your customers are doing. Supposing they have changed their tastes and preferences, supposing they are complaining about your product, supposing there are an extension of the product they want you to do. So your market is very, very close to you, because if you miss them, then what's the essence of your existence? So the market, the customers are very important. Now we also want to talk about suppliers. These are people, other individuals, organizations that provide your resources that you use in producing your goods and your services, okay? These people can also be a pain in your ass. These people can even, thwart your business arrangement. Most times when you don't agree on the specialization you want, or as there is, even your competitors can even, use them against you to say, oh, if we can cut supply of their raw materials, they may not be able to produce. And that's one thing. So it's also an environment that is external, but very, very close to every organization. Depending on what you do, you have your suppliers, you have your market. And then the intermediaries that I spoke about, we talked about independent organizations that will aid the flow of your product from the marketing organization to the market, your channel of distribution, channel of distribution, your finance, your middlemen, wholesalers, retailers, what have you, your warehouses, stores, where you put them. I mean, everything that will ensure, even your insurance too will come in there, Because when you have these products, you have them in the warehouses or in the stores, you need to insure them in case of fire outbreak or any other force majeure, so you don't lose entirely. So both your banks, your credit unions, all of them form the marketing intermediaries. If we take the case of banks that will supply your money, most times business people will always go, to look for an overdraft with their banks or loans and stuff like that. If you get to the bank and the bank, for one reason or the other, says, no, we can't give you because there's a new rule and what have you, there is nothing you can do because that is what the rule says, but they are closely knitted to your organization. So these are environments of businesses. Now, we have environments as sources of input and repository for organizational outputs. What do we mean? You need raw materials to be supplied you, okay, so that you can have your production. You need men to do the work. You need machines that will help process. You need materials that you're even going to process. So when you talk about your man, your material, even the method you're going to use, which is the knowledge and the skills that will be coming from the men you have employed, everything is put into the process of production of goods. So with that, this environment that is man, this man may be your competitor, this man may be your supplier, this man may be your employees, this man may be government, government regulators and what have you. Okay, so it is the environment, from the environment that you draw these men. It is this from the same environment that you also draw the material. It's from the environment that you also will get those who will apply certain methods and what have you, and the machines you are using. And then when you are done with the processing or procession, what do? You churn out your services or your goods or the products to what? The same society that gave you all of these people. Of course, your employees will use those products if they are the ones men can use. If they are not to be used for further production, they can use them. Even the government too, officials and what have you, will use them. Okay, anybody, your suppliers, the environment has supplied us all of these. If they are raw materials from nature, ecosystem gave you that. Okay, the children who you're producing for, because their demography, that yes, they'll be able to purchase all that you have bought. All of that, the ideas, the knowledge, the information, you pushed it from the environment, and then you churn out your goods and services also to the environment. Of course, to those, you turn it to them as a form of satisfaction, all right? And they will pay because they'll be willing to pay and they have the money to pay. So that is the environment as source of input and environment as source of repository for organizational outputs. The environment gives you push out what you have also to the environment. That is the way it works. Now, if you have to look at managing this interface between organizations and relevant environment, we have mentioned all of these environments. What do they do with the business? What is this relationship? How does it work? Now, if you check the relationship between organization and their environment, you will find out that there are three interfaces or interactions between business and the environment. One, you have exchange of information. Secondly, you have resources and influence. And then resources, and then influence and power. Let's look at them one after the other. When you talk about exchange of information, we all know that generating information is an effective way of getting over the problems of uncertainty and complexity of the environment. When they say, the business environment is uncertain, if it is uncertain, you have to do certain things to be able, to diffuse that uncertainty. What are we talking about? Exchange of information. You will need to scan your environment, look at the variables that are out there for you, generate information that you think is very important for you, that will aid your planning, your decision making, your control, and all of that. And when you get those information, that will enable you to forecast so that you will know, okay, yes, the environment is uncertain, but we can forecast to say that, yes, in the next couple of months or days, we should be able to do this. And with that planning and decision making is much easier. So the business organization too on its own, sometimes, gives information to agencies, sometimes voluntarily, because you're also looking for an information, sometimes too unintentionally, or sometimes legally. When we talk about legally, most times there are times rather that government will seek particular information from a business, and the business will have to satisfy that obligation by giving government, because government, is law and regulates your business. You have to give that information, Then voluntarily, when you supply information to your suppliers, giving what you want, and even your customers, when you produce and you go out and you publicize what you have, this product can do this and what have you, you are giving information. They in turn too will give you information. If they don't like the product, or they think you should do it in this better way, or they will appreciate it this way, they also give you back the information. So one interface of business and the environment that you need to manage well is that exchange of information. Seeking information and giving out information also. Now, next one is exchange of resources. When we talk about exchange of resources, I have mentioned that organizations or businesses get their inputs in form of funds, materials, manpower, equipment, resources from the environment, whether it is external or internal. You get those resources, from the environment. And then the organization too sustains itself by using those resources that has been gotten from the external environment to produce goods and services, or have an output, which you call either products or services or goods. And okay, depending also on the environment, you push out those products to your clients, to your customers, whatever, whoever they are. People produce for government, and so government can be their client or their customer. Okay, people produce even for the whole economy. Everybody can participate and enjoy the products or the services. And so that interaction process involves, the needs of the environment. You need to find out what the needs of the environment are. Then you cater for them, satisfy them, and they will pay in return. Okay, any of the what do you call it? Your environment. Now, exchange of influence and power. The environment holds considerable power over organizations due to control, over resources, information, and other outputs. Government control organizations, and that's an example of power relationship. If government says A and you want to do B, you will fall short of the law and you're likely to get punished. And other environmental factors too, whether they are macro or they are micro, exert also considerable influence over our structure and the functioning of an organization, be it in the planning and decision making processes. So it follows that the dependence and influence between business system and environment are reciprocal, to a large extent. When we talk about influence and power of the organization, you can also look at it from the point of view of the pressure groups that I spoke about earlier. The businesses can actually mount pressure on government through advocacy groups that can speak on their behalf to get government to stop particular regulations or legislation. It is very possible, okay? So changes take place in an organization. You can have influence and power that comes from the government or from the external environment, whether micro or macro, and business can also influence and use their power, but their power will get to nowhere really. They have to advocate and mount pressure through other people. So much so for organizations and their environment. I will implore you to check our business environment, BUS 221. We have lots of repositories in it that will enable you appreciate this topic. It's not a topic, there are topics really, but you can go through that will help you to understand it better. So we've been able to look at the meaning of organizations, types of organizations, definition of business environment, the types of environment, environments are sources of input and repository, and the interface between organizations and their relevant environment. So I don't know, I'm going to open the chat now so we can talk. If there are questions you want to ask, when I see your hands up, you'll unmute and ask your question. So, are there questions? Are there comments? I don't know. You can also use the chat room. You can put a chat. Let's see. Daniel or Sai, all right. Daniel or Sai. Yes, Daniel, you can unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
A very cool time with you today. I really appreciate your teachings. So please, and the question I want to really ask is related to like a personal business environment. The question is related to what you taught us today. How can a business thrive in an hostile environment? And aside that, how can a business be profiting in an environment that is very, very hostile?
How can business thrive in a hostile environment? And how can business be profiting, survive in a hostile environment?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, the truth is, talk about hostile environment. That's talking about security or insecurity, as the case may be, all right? Or talking about economy, like we look at the economic environment. The fact remains, if it is the economic environment, all you need to do is you started your business for the purpose of making profit. Is that not so? And so the forces of demand and supply determines what you do and how you sell it. So talking about making profit, interest rates are going high. Yes, maybe formal lending rate is going high, and then you had to borrow from the bank and you know how much you are going to pay back and all of that. Of course, what you do with that economic problem is to look at how you have earned and then look at how you intend to push it out to the people at a premium that you will not lose and they may not lose. You may not be looking for the optimum profit there is, but at least something to break even so that you can still remain in business. When we talk about hostilities, especially as it concerns insecurity, like we have in the case of the East now, as we were saying, and people had to scamper and run for their lives. I mean, there is nothing you can do. Of course, you will close shop and you'll have to wait until the, the system returns to normal. But then again, it is advised that when you have a business, you don't just put all your eggs in one basket. You're operating in an environment. Of course, when the hostilities come like that, it's only, signifying one thing, that you may also have to have a plan B, probably to look elsewhere where you can also establish. Why not doing entirely with that one? Because someday normalcy may return, okay? So with that, you can survive if it is possible that you can get elsewhere where you can establish your business and continue the operation. Because when we talk about hostilities and insecurity, it does not know anybody, neither does it understand the language of business. Like we heard, even as the whole thing were happening, we heard that some people's shops were looted, even in the East. People were cutting away things, from shops. So that will affect the business. That is hostility coming from insecurity in the land. So when we talk about insecurity, hostility, and what have you, there's little or nothing anybody can do to say you want to survive still within that environment. You have to play by the rules until the environment is calm. Then you can move out again for your normal business. But the pointer is you need to have some other businesses, maybe elsewhere, where you might enjoy relative peace. And if it is on the economic environment, I mean, you cannot operate beyond what the economy is offering you. You will not, because you want to survive and then you sell at a loss, or sell beyond your, your product cost and what have you. So that's my take. I don't know if that answers your question.
Mommy, next class, so we have next class by 3 p.m. now.
By 3 p.m.?
Yes, ma'am.
What's the time now?
This is to 3.
Yes. So, is there any other question? Ariwayo. I'll take 1 or 2 more and then we'll call it a day. Ariwayo. Ariwayo, on mute.
Good afternoon, ma.
Good afternoon.
Ma, yes, ma, I really enjoyed the lecture, ma. Which of these environments can we apply SWOT analysis?
Can we apply SWOT analysis?
Yes, can we apply to both? Can we apply to
usually SWOT analysis is applied to
or this analysis?
You apply it to your external environment. But because you call this SWOT, your strength lies within you. Your weaknesses lie within you. It's the opportunities and the threats that are outside of you, your control, of course. So once such opportunities or threats come, you need to analyze your strengths and your weaknesses to be able to take advantage of the opportunity or be able to manage the threat. So most times it's applied to the external environment. But even the advice is if you are in business, you need that continuous SWOT analysis to always, check your strengths and where you think you are weak, so that when the opportunity comes, you will not now begin